Alright, it's 6. I should probably get started. And getting started means, well, we should deal with the important matters first. I am dressed entirely appropriately, which reminds me that the call for papers for EuroBSD is open and you should all be submitting papers. That is, by the way, plenty enough. Oh, no, wait. After you get done submitting your papers, today's tasty beverage is a Chimay Triple in, appropriate glassware, as is only right and proper. And that's plenty enough of my face. Where did we leave this last week? I think we'd been messing with the bridge, so we should do some more messing with the bridge. Oh, and carp. And we have, where are they? Ah, there we go. Let's see if I can convince them to turn up on the appropriate desktop so you can all join in and see what goes on here. And right, what do we want? We want this to go away, and I want appropriate surfer. Why must everything be difficult? Ah, there we go. So we had 2 open commits ready for carp. The first one, where we, fixed a panic, has attracted no reviews. Cheers, yes, has attracted no reviews. The other one, where we added a test for this panic, has attracted great enthusiasm for reviews, any number of remarks, as is only usual. We've all heard about bike shedding, and, well, I can't complain too much. Review remarks were all constructive and useful and worthwhile. It's just amusing that people are more interested in reviewing test code than they are in reviewing, actual functional changes. Either way, these changes have been, this review, let's see, it's been open since last week. That is a full week. And so I'm just going to commit this. We're just going to be, we're just going to commit it, because otherwise we're going to wait for it for an absolute eternity, and I should not have closed that window. Or rather, I should move it, yes, because otherwise I'm going to forget what the number of that review is, because I suck. And I haven't even been drinking yet, I should fix that. Tasty. And that immediately forms my excuse for sucking. Now I'm drunk. It's not my fault anymore. Anyway, I have an up-to-date stream there, and we're still building worlds there. I don't know if we're going to wait for it, but we'll give it some time. I should have a couple of branches here from our review, and that should be D24302 and 302. Right. So this is our commit. There we go. Just going to throw it up there, and then we can patch dash I. Just patch. There we go. Wonderful. Quick diff to make sure that that does sort of look like what we think it should look like, at least all of the things applied. Helpful Git hints in the chat. You should all take a look at that. That is git clean -f -d -x. I should remember that one. Wrong terminal. We can git clean -f -d -x. And we can -n for dry run. That is very useful. I'm going to try to remember that one. Oh, do we have an... Oh, well, it's an empty directory, so we should just get rid of that now before I forget. What was I doing? Oh, yes, I was committing things. The reason that comes up, in case you're wondering why we would want to clean our Git tree, is for some reason ArcGit really wants your tree to be clean before you push patches. And well, now that I think about it, that is actually useful because it happens easily that you add a new file and you make a change to the make file to build the file. You create a new file, you write all of your shiny new code in the file, you do commit, and then you discover that you forgot to do svn add or git add or whatever, and people shout at you for breaking the build. Well, I say shout. People are generally fairly understanding because we've all been there. But we should still attempt to avoid it. So there we go. We can commit this change. So it's not been reviewed, but I'm going to commit it anyway for two reasons. The first is that you've all looked at it, so I should just mark this one as reviewed by Twitch chat and blame you guys if it doesn't work. That's the first reason. The second and slightly more serious reason why I'm just going to commit it is because remember when we tested this, it would just explode immediately. And now it no longer explodes immediately. So it's an improvement and we're going to commit it. This is the correct commit message. And we can push this. And while we're at it, we can look at our test commit, which should be this one. Yep. There we go. I have removed, yes. Copyright claim is in there. This isn't quite identical to the... Oh, would you look at that? Oh, yes. I forgot to touch my YubiKey, and so my YubiKey decided that that meant we couldn't commit. Well, my YubiKey refused to give permission to use the SSH key, so I couldn't log into the SVN server, so the commit failed. Well, here we go. I'm drunk. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. What is that? Don't commit drunk? Of course I can commit drunk. Who's going to stop me? So let's try this again. And if I now fondle my YubiKey, there we go. That's amazing. So now we can update. And just to bring our tree back into... Oh look, somebody's fondling LLVM. Good on them. That's probably why I'm compiling LLVM again. So much CPU time building LLVM, but that's okay. There we go. And now the thing to do, of course, is we need to remember that we've added a file. So we should probably svn add this file. Otherwise, the commit will go through just fine, and then the test run will fail because the file that we try to install and execute isn't there. So we've added carp, and there's some test code in there. While I remember some of the improvements that we've made, well, I've moved it. It no longer lives in test sysnet, but lives in test sysnet inet, which corresponds to where the carp code lives, so that makes sense. And I've also changed what used to be a static sleep for 3 seconds and wait in hopes that carp would be up by then, into a polling loop where we go and check if one of our two jails has become the master jail, has become the carp master rather, before we actually continue. So now you might wonder what happens if none of the jails ever become master. Won't we sleep forever? Yes and no. QA will helpfully time out our test after a few minutes and then mark it as failed. Arguably, we should fail a bit earlier than 10 minutes or so. Actually, don't know off the top of my head how much of a timeout QA will give us, but it'll give us some. So eventually it will stop, and that's good enough for now. This is, after all, test code, and it only needs to consider the happy scenario where things actually work. Well, up to a point. If they fail, they need to be investigated anyway. We've also added an IPv6 test because, well, IPv6 is kind of important, and it would be nice if it also worked. So we can commit this. I/O slightly slow if you try to do it while you're also building a kernel, or, well, world. But that's fine. That's not what I meant to do. That is definitely not what I meant to do. I think I may have mentioned once or twice that I'm terrible at typing. Which review is this? This is 24303, so we can paste that, and we should probably also look at who's reviewed this. So this has attracted a nice amount of attention. I should probably copy this name, because otherwise I'm going to misspell things, and that would be terrible. There we go. And we can push this one as well. Oh, and remember to touch the UB key. There we go. Isn't that wonderful? And then update this SVN tree just in case. So that's all. Wow, still building LLVM. We're probably not going to wait for that. Might wait for this update. Tasty, tasty beers. So, let's try to remember what we were doing last week. Oh yes, we were going to look at a bridge problem. Tell me, okay, OBS is still there. OBS has crashed on me once or twice, and I would hate for you all to go away, because that would be silly. Sitting in a room all by myself, talking to myself. Good. The problem, well, one of the problems we discovered last week was that this sample carp script, and I can pull that up, that was test cases PR mumble mumble mumble. This test script actually still didn't work. And I remember that we looked at why that would be for a little while, and discovered that our jails wound up with bridges with the same MAC address. And of course, machines with the same MAC address don't do too well communicating. So let's go look at the bridge code and see if we can figure out why this is. I remember that the bridge code lives under netifbridge.c. I may have been doing things to the bridge code for a while and found that, you know, I remember where it lives, rather. I have also cheated for this particular problem. This is the relevant bit of code. So where are we? We're in bridge clone create. So this is what happens when we create a new bridge. Interfaces like bridge have cloners. I'm sure there's an excellent reason for this. I don't know what it is. Suffice to say that, sorry, interfaces like bridges, e-pairs, tabs have cloners and are created through struct if clone, through a clone create. We don't need to worry too much about this. We create a bridge, we allocate struct ifnet for them, we set up all sorts of things. Default, we initialize locks. I hope the bells aren't too loud. It's Easter, and you know, this is nominally a Catholic country or something, or lots of Catholics in this country anyway. So we set up all sorts of things. We set up, these are kind of interesting, set up callbacks for transmit and queue flush and init and all sorts of things. And one of the things that we do during startup is we generate an Ethernet address for this bridge. Because a bridge is a pseudo is an interface. A bridge interface can exist without member interfaces, so it needs a MAC address. Actually, let's do this. Bridge create, and now we have bridge 0. There we go. There is a bridge. It has an Ethernet address. And actually, well, we can look at that later. So our bridge has an Ethernet address that we've just plucked out of thin air. And we've actually got the code up here. What does it do? It retrieves a host ID. And if FB is set, and it's the first time we come through this loop, it's not going to be set because FB is set to 0. Or our host ID is 0, we generate a random Ethernet address. Otherwise, we set the locally administered bits, so our first octet, our first byte is 0x02, and that is also what we see. And then we take the host ID and the unit number. Now the host ID is kernel.host ID, I believe. There we go. So this is our host ID. Can we convince this thing? Oh, there we go. To give us a hexadecimal value. And if we now look at our ifconfig, hopefully we will see, there we go. So our first byte is 02, and then we get 42 AE91 B400. So if we go back to, that might look familiar. Well, kern.host ID is completely random, but that's only part of how we allocate this, and the relevant bit here is that we take the host ID and then the unit number. The unit number is, for bridge 0 is 0, the unit number for bridge 1 will be bridge 1, unless you start to rename your bridges, which you can do, and I have done in some circumstances. The problem with that is that, well, there are any number of amusing problems with that. I have an open bug that has been open for ages, that if you create a, how does it work again? You can panic the system by having PF loaded and renaming an interface and an interface group to have the same name, and then PF goes all explodey. Any decade now I will have to fix this, but suffice it to say that the nice people who changed our network stack to allow renaming of interfaces and interface groups failed to fully consider all possible scenarios. And I've looked at trying to fix this, and it is a distinctly non-trivial problem, by which I mean I looked at it and I went, nope, 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 not touching that. Anyway, back on topic. What happens here with this host ID is that we use that as essentially a random value that we assume will always be different. Now, the fun thing is, if we create a jail, and we jexec in iron sysctl kern.host ID, and, well, we'll do a hexadecimal dump. Oh, that is now set to 0. That is not what I had expected. That is actually very strange. Because my read of the code was that the host ID would be inherited from the host, and that would explain why we generated the same MAC addresses in all of these jails. Now that appears to be slightly more complicated. Could that be? No. Why would that be? Why would that be? Yep, so the host ID remains the same. I can... So now yep, there we go. We have now generated a fully random address, or something that should at least be a fully random address. So I'm slightly confused as to why... Well, we'll create another jail. Because I thought I fully understood what the problem was, and it turns out that I don't. Okay, but we've created a second jail. We're now in the Iron E jail rather than in the Iron jail, and we generate exactly the same MAC address. So actually, what we have are two problems. Both of our cases, if we scroll back up, so we've got this. Both our if and our else, we end up generating identical addresses. That's interesting. We should go look at that case. So my assumption was, if we go look at where we retrieve the host ID, get cred host ID, we grab this from PR host ID, which gets set in, and I'm cheating, usually this takes a little bit longer, where we jail set. We assign the host ID based on the parent host ID. So if we inherit the host ID from the parent, which would appear to be from CH flags, but unfortunately the... okay. Is there a host flag? Oh, there we go. I think what happens is if you set the inherit flag, and we can test this, irony 2 persist vnet inherit. Oh, host inherit rather. Irony 2 sysctl current.host ID. There we go. Then we will have the exact same host ID in the jail as we would on the host. Otherwise, we apparently end up with a host ID of 0 and end up in where were we? In ethergen adder. So question from chat is, so the fact that it is 0 is already a bug if we inherit from the parent. So it turns out that by default we don't inherit from the parent. If we specify that we wish to inherit from the parent, we correctly inherit from the parent, but the problem with that is that we end up here, and we also generate the same MAC address in two different jails. I figured that the way to fix this was to just take the top octet, and rather than take some bits from the host ID, we'll just take some bits from the jail ID, which would already significantly reduce the odds of a collision. Which isn't too difficult to do, but it turns out that there are two cases where it will fail, because ethergen adder, I had assumed, would generate a unique address, but it does not appear to do this. Oh, there we go. This code takes an address based on, well, if I'm reading this correctly, yeah, there we go. We take the host UUID, which is inherited apparently, which we can check. Presumably, there we go. Kern.host UUID, which is the same in our host as in our jail. And then we hash this, we SHA-1 hash this, and then we use the digests to generate our MAC address, which is, that's wonderful. Oh, and we apparently also store in the interface name. That's clever, but not good enough. Because when our two jails have the same UUID, because we've inherited it from the host, and the same interface name, well, they're not going to be different anymore, are they? So I think there are two places where we need to fix this problem. We need to fix this one, where I'm going to propose that we just stir in the jail ID, because at least the combination of host ID, if we assume that host IDs are unique across hosts, so different on different physical machines, and we should have unique IDs for our jails as well, the combination of host ID and jail ID should be unique again. So we're just going to stir in the top 32 bits. We're just going to stir in, rather, the jail ID, just the bottom bits of the jail ID on a philosophy of it's better than nothing, and it will prevent the immediate collisions. Also very tempted to say that we should just always use EtherGen Adder because it's much more robust and much less likely to collide, but, well, we'll post something for review and see if people have feedback on it. So if we take the jail ID here, JID will need to retrieve the jail ID from somewhere. We'll look at where we can get that in a little bit. But that's a conceptual fix here. Oh, and then maybe just this. And then we lose a little bit of, we no longer take 32 bits of host ID, but only 24 bits of host ID, but that's good enough. We can assume that they will be unique. If you run into collisions here, then, if you run a sufficiently large install, you're still going to run into collisions, but that's sort of inevitable at some point. This should at least prevent the immediate trivial collision. And if we change this one, where we take the UUID and the interface name, if we were to say also stir in UUID and jail ID, and then while we're at it, fix the overly long line, then that should fix our immediate problem as well. Because then our MAC address, the MAC address that we will compute, will depend not only on the host that we are on and the name of the interface, which we've discovered is identical here, but also on the jail ID. Oh, and when we end up building our kernel, this isn't going to compile, but la la la. That's all fine. So the next question is, where do we get the jail ID? So we've got a current thread pointer, which is underscore cur thread. Actually, let's just look at CR prison, because that's CR prison contains is a struct prison, and that contains, if we select the right line, contains a bunch of jail related information. Struct prison, and there we go. So we want the CR prison.pri ID. Is there actually a convenience wrapper function for us to access this? I might be missing it. I think what we want is, yeah, cred CR prison PRID. Prison find child, jail get. I don't immediately see a convenience wrapper function that should help us to get at this, because, always be lazy, always try to reuse things if they exist. But I don't immediately see a wrapper macro or function or anything that will get us the jail ID. Do we have one in current jail? While we're running through this code, not immediately. Okay. Does the structure contain a lock? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we are going to need... We're going to need a wrapper function. Why are we going to need a wrapper function? Because the jails have mutexes associated with them, so I really think that we're going to need a... I'm going... No, we're just going to do this. Get jail ID. Why are we doing this? Because it needs to be locked while we access this information. So we'll just copy this, and we'll just int gid equals, because obviously we don't want to forget to unlock. And that should just compile, that should just work. We do need to, of course, stick that in a header somewhere. We've got the jail header, that's perfect for this. We can get jail ID, do we need, nope. We don't need any tabs in there anywhere. While we're at this, does this have, oh, would you look at this. There is in fact a get jail ID. I'm an idiot. I mean, you already knew that, but there is a get jail ID because I just wrote it 10 seconds ago. I'm going to blame lack of beer for this one, so let's try to fix that. Better. I don't know if I've gotten any smarter, but at least I've had more beer. Oh, yes, and good catch, Babak. We do actually need to return the jail ID. So why this different style, by which I assume you mean returning directly rather than copying, because returning to a pointer here is kind of pointless. I really don't know why get cred host ID does this. I mean, it makes sense for these things. Yeah, I mean, you make a good point in that I'm torn between two impulses here. The obvious way to implement this is it's an integer. We just return the integer, and then you can write gid equals get jail ID cred, which is the natural way of spelling this. Because if we do it otherwise, we'd have to do this, which, you know, it works just as well, but it's less obvious. Of course, you need to spell it get jail ID, but that's, you know, we're not actually going to use it this way. Doing the return the way we spelled it means that you can have some other func that needs a foo and a bar argument and a get jail ID cred, which lets you nest things a little bit more nicely. The conflicting impulse with that one is consistency. Yeah, that's a reasonable point. It's yes. You can argue it both ways. I'm not convinced that there is that there is an obvious correct answer. There is, of course, there's, say, jailed without vnet function here, which just which does a check and returns a value the way you would expect it to. That's also the way this jailed macro is used, so you can definitely argue it both ways. What I'm not going to do is change this function all over the kernel, if only because I suspect it doesn't have too many uses. Why did I do this? I've just noticed this. So the ePair interface leads me to believe that it might have exactly the same problem. So let's pop what we were doing on the stack and go take a very quick look at this. If we don't have a host ID, we randomize our host ID, and we use our host ID as a key to generate a hash, and then we're almost certainly going to use this hash to generate an Ethernet address, which means that for jails that inherit the host ID, which is not default. You need to set a host equals inherit for this, but your repairs are going to conflict as well. Boom. We're not going to fix that one today. I'm feeling lazy. We're not going to fix that today. But, somebody remember that actually ePair has the same problem. Hooray. Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, we were going to do a get JLID on our cur thread td ucred. I mean, we could do this, but that's becoming a bit long, isn't it? So we'll just do JID equals get JLI ID cur thread. There, and we can just copy this because we need it in our gen adder as well, where we want to do this and where we want to do this as well. So this one's fixed. That should just compile there. This isn't quite just yet not going to compile just yet, and now it should compile. What are we building? We're still in libc, so we're still building worlds. Okay, a question here. What is the tool that popped up showing the usage of the function? That's based on cscope. So I do control backspace S, and it shows me where that string pops up. It's not quite as good at parsing C as you might hope, but it is reasonably good. And this is a lot faster than grepping through a tree or whatever. Anyway, so I think that realistically speaking, this should now start to work. I'm tempted to wait for our build to complete so we can get our world up to date and everything. Maybe, just maybe, what we should be doing is taking a look and seeing if we can write a test for this while we're at it. I think that this is correct. Have we got any other changes along here? No, that all looks good. Actually, we might as well commit this. Generate a separate commit, and then start writing our test, and the system can keep building while it's doing that. Oh dear, my bottle is empty. This is a terrible problem. While we're at it, this is one of the things I adore about Git. Git initially is really confusing to work with because you've got your local commits and your remote commits, and you've got the difference between committing something and pushing something, and then you can have any number of branches, and then to make it all even worse, you've got this index thing that you need to stage changes into before you can commit them. It feels really weird, but the thing that I adore about it is that it doesn't apply now. Well, actually, let's make it apply. And I'm not even going to fix the typo. Often when I'm debugging something, when I'm investigating a bug, I end up with things like this, or even more realistically, things like this all over the tree. When I go and splat debug traces all over the tree to figure out, what's going on here. What's the call flow that we're taking? Why is this broken? So I end up with with dozens, not usually hundreds, but with dozens of printfs all over the place. And then when you go to commit, you kind of have to take them out, because what we don't want to do is generate a commit with 14 kp mumble in here, not in here. Why is this happening? God damn it! Why is this broken printf messages all over the tree? Whoops. We don't want that when we commit. But Git lets us do git add -p when we're going to stage changes that are just changes in our files to the index, and add p will let me add patches. It's a synonym for git add -i for an interactive add, and I can now choose the hunks of my diff that I want to add. So I've added the getJLID function. I want to add this. Yes. I've added the JIT variable. I want to add this. Oh, this is a debug printf. I don't want to add this. These are two changes that I want to add. Actually, what you can even do is you can make it drill down more into more detail. So we do S, we've split up this diff. So we want to add this, and this we want to edit. Oh, chat apparently says that -p is for partial changes. I remember it as for, I want to apply a patch, but sure, whatever. I can even edit these changes, which is what I was getting at, because these braces serve no purpose, so I can just delete them. We want to add all of this. We want to add the header change. There we go. And if we now diff, we see that we've got some leftover changes. These are not staged for commit. Our cache changes, these are staged for commits. And you will see that we will commit JID and 0xFF without the braces. And there's no sign of the printf in there. So this is incredibly useful. One other common scenario for me is that I will be, writing a larger change, and then discover that, oh, hang on, there's a typo here in this comment that I want to fix, and I want that to be a separate commit. I'll rant about proper commits later, but I want that to be a separate commit. And Git lets me do this. It lets me say, okay, I only want this one particular line to be its own commit. I can add it, I can commit it, and I can continue my work. Makes it so much easier to do random tiny little fixes all over the tree while you're doing things. So, git commit. Arguably, these are two independent changes, but they sort of fix the same problem, so I'm going to commit them both in one go. So commit messages, I think I've mentioned this last week when we wrote our commit message, but commit messages are really, really important. Actually, while we're here, and we can ignore, come on already, machine is slow while it's building. I'm sure there's a bug that we can file about this. Let's ignore the first couple of commits that we've got here. There we go. FreeBSD by and large does reasonably well on commit messages. I kind of hate to say this, but Linux is really good at commit messages. Gotta give them that much. Their commit messages are on average even better than ours. These by and large are pretty good from a very first glance. This one tends to match my format. I tend to start with a tag. Which subsystem did I touch? What am I trying to do? Okay, we add an option for forcible unmounting of a dataset while receiving a snapshot. That's neat. Then it goes and explains what the problem is. Currently, when the dataset is in use, we can't receive snapshots. And then it goes and adds an example of how you can demonstrate the problem. And this commit adds an option M, which attempts to forcibly unmount the datasets. Thanks to this, we can enforce receiving snapshots in a single step. So it doesn't explain how, well, it explains a little bit how this problem was addressed, but it doesn't go into any sort of detail about how it was implemented in the code. It just goes, this was the problem, this is how we fixed it. Why is that important? When you look at a random change, you want to know, why did we do this? Because if you want to know how it was done, well, we can just go look at the diff. Well, this is man page change, there we go. This is the code change. So it adds one Boolean option force unmount, and it passes the MS force flag. So it's a really simple diff to read, but the problem is that given just this diff, you don't necessarily know why that change was required, and the why question is so important. When I'm reading through code, very often I will ask myself, why was this done? And that is the question that you need to answer. So same thing for this commit, to unwind a little bit back to what we're doing here today. Why are we making this change? Why are we storing jail ID into the MAC address that we generate for bridges? Why are we doing this? Because we're fixing MAC address conflicts in VNet jails. If we create two jails, two VNet jails, because of course this problem doesn't apply to non-VNet jails. Create two VNet jails, that's still building, and create interface in each. End up with the same MAC based on the host ID. If set or what else is it based on? Reminds me. This is in my if either subr or based on the UUID. Yeah, so chat asks about the two cases. We're actually fixing both of these cases. When host inherit is set or it is not set, we're fixing both of them at the same time. Obviously, if you have one jail with host inherit set and one jail with host inherit not set, you're not going to have a conflict, but, well, that's not that important. I mean, you will have two jails without a MAC address conflict, but you add a third one and you're going to conflict again. Resulting in the and we will mitigate this problem by including jail ID in the MAC address. Still not perfect, but to be fair, users who are at risk of running into this, say that you run a virtual hosting company and you run thousands upon thousands of jails on your machine, and you want to give them all bridges or e-pair interfaces, as we're going to forget for today, then you're still at risk of running into this. But it is relatively easy to mitigate by including a startup script that will just go and change your MAC addresses at startup to something random, and then you're almost certainly not going to run into these conflicts. or you can generate them to something static based on the jail ID or the customer name or whatever. And then you're also not going to have this problem, but we don't want users to have to work around kernel bugs or limitations. So we're just going to commit this. That's still building. Wow, I have run out of patience for this build. Or are we building the kernel now? We are... What file are we building? Where is the file name? Where is the file name? It should be around here somewhere. We're building dev sounds PCI, so we're building the kernel at least, so we'll just wait for it. That is a good question. What is the jail ID set to if we are not in a jail? That is actually a really good question. I believe this is /a grab jail. I think it's set to 0. Do we get? We'll get jails. Do we get the jail ID in jail? That is an interesting question. Oh yeah, there we go. Just missed it. Oh well, here it is. Security.jail.param.jid is 1. So if we jexec back to our jail and go syscuttle. Oh, this is param. Syscuttle dash a grab jid. Do we get a jid? No. Huh. I suspect that it's set to 0, and we're going to end up with a 0 byte there. But I'm not entirely sure. And the way we're going to find out is we're going to discover that together just as soon as our kernel finishes building. Okay. Just as soon as our kernel finishes building, we'll install this. We'll reboot, and we'll just test it. Question from chat is, it seems that I have 2 trees, one for hacking with Git and one for committing to the SVN repository. That is correct. And then how do I synchronize them? I do and I don't. My SVN tree, which lives under commit source, is unmodified, unmolested. There are no changes in that tree. That is literally just the current version of what is in the repository. And I use that one to commit because I don't quite trust, well, as we can see, latest 2 commits were us during the stream. Because I don't quite trust Git SVN to do the commits for me. My user source tree, where I actually do development, is indeed a Git tree. And it originates from, oh wow, there's a lot of garbage in here. But this is really the only relevant tree. I use the official, mostly official Git mirror of the SVN repository. And well, we can actually git remote updates our origin. So there's a synchronization task that runs that takes subversion changes and pushes them into Git and does this automatically. And if we log master, then we will see that in actual fact, my 2 changes have already made it in. So the way things get synchronized is I manually push them in Subversion and manually commit them. And then after, usually I think half an hour, I think that the synchronization task runs every half an hour. Next time I do a git pull, I will pull in those changes. I will rebase my tree on top of the SVN tree. And that's how I synchronize them. Because we will see, if I go look at my log, we've got this uncommitted change. And then we've got a bunch of carp things, and we've got a bridge test, and we've got epic fixes and carp fixes that are all over the place. I have some unrelated work in progress things that need to get pushed at some point that just live on the top of my tree, and they just continuously get rebased. Happily, I tend to touch things that nobody else wants to touch. Things like PF and the bridge, so I'm usually the only one that touches them, and I don't tend to get any sort of merge conflicts along the way. We're still waiting for that kernel build. Hopefully that will finish soon, because I'm nearly done with my beer. Ideally, I should also write a test for this, but I'm feeling kind of lazy and I'm not going to. Or not today, anyway. What I would still like to accomplish today is I want to test this change. I'm pretty confident that it's going to work and is going to do the thing that we expect it to do. And then I want to post it for review, and then that is pretty much everything that I want to do today. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free. Now is an excellent time for questions. Because otherwise you have to listen to me talk about random things, and that never ends well. Or God forbid singing. Oh, excellent. Perfect timing. So let's see, update-p. So you're supposed to install the kernel and then reboot, and then install world and reboot. I'm lazy. This is a development machine. I kind of don't care. So we're just going to install world and reboot. Well, install world, install kernel, etc update, and reboot. And while we're waiting for this, might as well see if there are any packages that need updating. I have reminded you, but I'm going to remind you again, you should all submit talk and tutorial proposals to EuroBSD. Important question. The beer that I am drinking today, and let me grab OBS so that I can get this into the shot, is a Chimay Triple. It's an authentic Trappist beer, and it is quite nice. I was actually looking for the date on this thing. It's a recent beer because it is à consommer de préférence avant fin. So I should drink it before the end of March 2022. This is very strange. All of the beers I buy have this horrible misprint on them. They all say I should drink them before a certain date, but that's a misprint. They're much nicer if you drink them after that date. Or rather, the beers that re-ferment on the bottle, which is, most of the beers that are worth drinking do this. They tend to last a nice long while, and they are nicer when a lot of them are nicer when they've had some time to age. Maybe next week I'll dig out some of my very rare Westvleteren, and the Westvleteren 12 is, it's a perfectly nice beer if you drink it young, but it is so much nicer when it's had a couple of months or years to age. Question about EuroBSD. Is it still likely to happen this year? The answer to that is I don't know. EuroBSD, the organization, has announced, in case you may have missed it, that we're going to wait until June 1st to make a decision. The state of the world being what it is, it's impossible to predict whether or not we can organize a conference. Right now, we just don't know. It's possible that things will start to get better because, after all, it's only April. The conference is not for another 5.5 months. It's entirely possible that the conference can happen. We don't know. We're going to give it a couple more months, and then we're going to decide. Given that we've committed to hotel and venue and location and all of those things, and we've not yet selected speakers, there's no point in cancelling right now. It's much safer to it makes much more sense to just wait another month and a half or so before we decide whether or not that we can actually run the conference. Given that we don't know, we still encourage everyone to submit papers. Submit talk and tutorial proposals. Papers for EuroBSDCon are not mandatory. Although if you would like to submit a paper and get it published with a, a DOI number so that it is recognized as an official academic submission, we can arrange that as well, thanks to AsiaBSDCon. Thank you very much for that. Anyway, point being, right now we don't know if it's going to happen or not. If you are inclined to talk at EuroBSD, you should definitely submit a talk proposal. Because even if we decide that the physical conference doesn't happen, we may decide to run an online conference like BSD Can is going to do. Although, to be entirely honest, if we decide not to run the physical conference, we may not yet have decided that we want to do an online conference. We're going to wait to see how well BSD Can works before we decide to do an online conference in that case. But that means that if you want to talk, you should still submit, because once our call for papers closes, which is before we announce whether or not the physical conference will happen, you'd be too late to actually submit to actually be invited to present at the conference. If we get enough submissions, and I'm hoping that we will, we're not going to reopen the call for papers after we decide to make it an online conference. So submit early, submit often. What you should not do is book non-refundable hotels and tickets, because we don't know. We can't predict the future. We simply don't know if we'll be able to run the conference or not. Anyway, our system has managed a reboot. So we can ifconfig bridge 0 create. So that happily already didn't panic. So we have a bridge and we have an Ethernet ID, and as we can tell from the top byte, the top byte is 02, the second byte is 00, so our jail ID on our host is just 0. So if we create a jail, and we ifconfig bridge 0 create, and as you can tell, I can't actually type worth a damn, and we have generated a particular MAC address. So we'll create another jail. And we ifconfig bridge 0 create, ifconfig bridge 0, and what do we see? Our MAC address. Oh yes, right, yes, of course. This was a wrong jail to test, because now, because this jail inherited the host ID, we're generating along the host ID path, but we can see that while our bottom couple of bits are the same as our host jail, so they are AE91B400, our second byte is now 02, so we no longer have a MAC address conflict with the host. So that's tested, that's excellent. We can exit, we can our irony jail, there we go. We can jail -c our irony jail. Because this one should have a randomly generated MAC address like our first jail, so like this one. Will work better if we create it. There we go. So now our MAC addresses are 58.9c FC0032 7c versus 45. So our 32 versus 3f. So we can see that our MAC addresses are clearly different. So now we're going to jail-r, irony, and iron. So our jails are gone. Test cases PR, sh. We're going to run this test script again, and with any luck, there we go, that's what I was looking for. Our pings actually succeed now, because our MAC addresses are no longer the same. And what was reported in, oh well, there we go. This is the stray printf that we'd left around. So this is fine because it's not in our commit. What the bug report stated was that this didn't work, this deadlocked after a handful of pings, and that no longer happens. But that's not a result of the MAC address changes that we did. That's a result of the bridge performance work that I did, generously sponsored by the FreeBSD Foundation. That bridge work is still under review as well. I have two people who have promised me that they would review it who have not yet had the time to do this. I don't particularly blame them for that. I know how busy things can get, and reviews really do take a lot of time to do properly. Anyway, the good news is this worked. It works. We're happy. It works. So we can stop this, that's fine. And we can log into our thing again, and we can push that change for review. So we just want our top commit, and IO is slow in this VM. Okay, arc-git. And we're going to copy Ed on this one and the network team because it's a bridge change. And actually, while we're here, we've touched this, and I wonder, have other people been touching this as well? Should we be including someone else in this review? Gleb has done epic things, lots of epic things. John has done mbuff changes. Yeah, see, that's what I was looking for. Kyle has touched randomization of address bits. And yeah, there we go. He has actually done this function. Yep, this function was added in Kyle's commit. So we're going to copy Kyle on this one, because he might have opinions as well. There we go. And this is probably going to fail because our tree is not clean. And then I need to see if I can remember the git clean command. So there we go. Well, I didn't remember it, my shell remembered it. We can just, yep, all of those files can go. There are no more files that need to be deleted now. So now, probably because we've got local changes, there we go. We've stashed them. And there we go. There's another review. And we have created this. You've all contributed to this. You should all be very proud. Well done. Round of applause for yourselves. With that, I think I'm going to stop for today. Ideally, we should be writing a test for this as well, but it's Sunday, it's nice weather outside. I would like to go have a second beer without speaking at my computer for the next hour. So we're just not going to do that. We'll deal with, we'll do that some other day. Thank you all very much for being here. I will hang out and chat for a little while longer. I think the chat will still work. Otherwise, just ping me on Twitter or something if you have more questions, or just save them for next week. If you people are interested, I will try to remain motivated to do more streams. Thank you all very much for being here. Remember to submit talk and tutorial proposals to EuroBSD. And think up some good questions for next week. Thank you all very much for being here. These questions make it a lot more interesting to do this. Thanks for the help, and we'll see you all some other time.